So apparently we're fine with 500-year-old fairies dating freshly turned 18-year-olds, but lose our minds when there's a 10-year age gap in contemporary romance? Like, may it make sense? Are age gap romances actually problematic, or are we just talking about them in the wrong way? Hi, I'm Rachel D. Oak, and you're listening to the podcast where we overanalyze basic book tropes, call out nonsense, and still admit why we love the toxic shit anyways. Today's episode will be dissecting the age gap book trope, why people hate it, why I think they're wrong when it actually is harmful, and why you and I might secretly love it anyway. First things first, let's talk about what makes age gaps problematic. A lot of it comes down, at least for me, to the difference between context versus the number. A lot of people who say they hate age gap romances are like, he's old enough to be her dad. But I think that's a lot of lazy critique and misses the actual issue, the context, the power imbalance, and the maturity gap that often features in age gap book romances. Oftentimes, there's a male main character and a female main character, and the female main character is often really young in comparison to the male main character, but also she's usually in dire straits, in a lower financial position, in which she becomes overly dependent or overly reliant in the male main character. I've seen this play out time and time again, and I have read quite a few age gap romance books, which is why I'm qualified to make this episode. Ultimately, it's like the life stage differences matter more than the years themselves, at least to me. I think there's nothing wrong with a 20-year age gap in a romance book if both of the characters are independent and consenting adults. The problem for me is when the heroine is infantilized into a damsel role, and I see this play out time and time and time again. There is nothing wrong with portraying age gaps, but how we portray them matters severely. Words matter. We shouldn't be blaming the number, we should be blaming the dynamics. And the dynamics here are so important. You cannot ethically portray somebody in a vulnerable position and call it romance without discussing all of the potential pitfalls of this sort of relationship. An author needs to take this into mind. You don't know who your readers are and you don't know their age. The things that you write, they matter. You don't know even the circumstances of life or the situation that the person reading it is reading it on, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with portraying an age gap romance, but there's a difference between endorsement and critique, like taking a step into it even further. Currently, I'm writing a book called Protect Caroline at All Costs, and in it, there is a small age gap in terms of numbers, but there are deeply problematic circumstances surrounding these two characters. If I simply acknowledge that imbalance, acknowledge that the male character has a lot more financial resources, a lot more independence, a lot more lived experiences, I am normalizing a type of relationship dynamic that is ultimately really damaging and really toxic. I cannot shy away from that. The moment that I choose not to touch on that subject, not to touch on all those ramifications, is just wrong, especially in the context of the book themselves and the age of the characters themselves. And also, readers aren't dumb. Like, we can sense when an author is truly interrogating the dynamic versus just glamorizing abuse. So just trying to brush these issues under the rug, it's not right. Like, if your heroine is locked in the basement for 5 years and you're framing it as romantic instead of terrifying, is that still fiction, or are you writing propaganda? In one of my podcast episodes, I have discussed, when does dark romance go too far? When is it too dark? And I'm not saying that age gap romance or age gap romance books in general are dark romance. What I am saying is when you're portraying a really large age gap, or when the context is within a dark romance context, it is the author's responsibility to address these issues, to actually take them seriously. It gives me the ick, it makes my stomach kind of queasy when that's not discussed at all. Because in my mind, you know for a fact there's a 15-year-old out there who loves this author and is going to pick up that book and is going to think that it's perfectly fine to be in a relationship with someone who is extremely older. It's not fine, and we need to discuss it within the book context, within the fiction, so that it doesn't bleed into the reality. And I know we're talking about books here, and we're talking about book tropes, and so many people are like, it's not that deep, but it is deep. And we know that it is deep. When we sit down, don't we talk about our favorite books like like giggling and kicking our feet and like, ha ha ha. Like, we feel the emotions, we feel all of it. And there is something to be said about the neuroscience behind it, about the fact that when you imagine an experience in your head versus your lived experience, oftentimes your brain can't actually tell the difference. Is why we tell athletes to imagine their race before they actually race, or imagine doing the slam dunk before they actually do it, or imagine themselves winning the game before they actually win it. It has been proven scientifically that it helps their performance and it helps them achieve the desired result. So when we take that knowledge that we already have and we impart it onto fiction, we have to admit that there is something to be said about how it bleeds into reality, that the wrong portrayal of certain relationship dynamics can actually affect how dynamics play out in the real world. And while we're talking about reader psychology and why people, including myself, actually enjoy an age gap romance, there's a level of escapism here for most of us, as it is in any book and in any book trope. In this one specifically would be that allure of maturity, of maybe a forbidden element that you might even enjoy in different book tropes, or even a rewriting of lived experiences with happier endings. On a personal note, I was always told that I was mature for my age, and obviously I think that bled into a little bit of the conditioning of why I enjoy certain book tropes, why I enjoy certain styles and genres of books, right? I never clicked with my peers. I always gravitated towards older partner dynamics in fiction, in real life, yada yada. So obviously there's a connection there. Taking a step back, I can see that for me. It doesn't matter if you're an author or if you're a reader. You need to eventually take a step back if you're reading tons of dark romance or reading quote unquote taboo topics, and think to yourself, what is behind this? Is there something that I actually need to explore deeper in my real life, or is this something that is just fun for me? Because it can be not that deep, and it can just be escapism and just fun entertainment. I completely accept that. What I'm talking about is when we're repeatedly gravitating towards certain themes and certain dynamics. I really wanted to bring up an example here of an age gap romance that a lot of people hated and that a lot of people kind of, I don't want to say credit, but bring up when we talk about age gaps, and that is Credence by Penelope Douglas. And I read Credence, and I read Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas as well, which also features an age gap romance. Credence, and specifically, obviously it raised a lot of eyebrows because it's an age gap romance and it's also sort of familial ties. It's weird to say, even just saying it out loud, it's weird. But I think the author did a really good portrayal of age gap in the sense that she really dug into the ramifications of it. She really dug into, why do these characters act the way that they do? Why is there this attraction? Why does this relationship unfold in the way that it does? And what is the past and what is the present conditions that play into it, right? If Penelope Douglas hadn't done the work, if she hadn't explicitly put in the trigger warnings, explore the causes and ramifications for this age gap, I don't think the book would have gotten as much critical acclaim as she did, and it wouldn't have been beloved by the amount of audience that it has. That's the thing. You have to do the work. You have to explain why these things work the way they do in order for people to actually enjoy it. Like I said, readers are not dumb. They understand when these books are just a cover-up. I'm not going to name drop the book, but there was a very famous book whose author, I'm pretty sure she's in jail right now, actually, because it was a glamorization of an age gap romance that quite clearly was a guide to grooming, really, and it was under the guise of, oh, this is just fiction and I don't see the problem with it. The book still hit the shelves, even though beta readers brought up, this doesn't sound right, and this isn't just dark or taboo romance, this is actually wrong, and you're not diving into any of the aspects of why this might be wrong or taking into account any of that. And that is a very real consequence to when we take a book trope and we don't address it properly. It's fine to write a toxic dynamic. It's what makes dark romance fun and appealing. What's not fine is not imparting it with any sort of detail or nuance whatsoever, for obvious reasons. All that being said, like I mentioned, I enjoy age gap romance, and I don't need anybody to come in here and try to make me feel bad about it. Like, if you can root For literal murderers in mafia romance, do you really draw the morality line at age differences? I know you saw Twilight, okay? I know who was Team Edward and who was Team What's-His-Face. Jacob? Was it Jacob? I think it was Jacob. Who are you to judge me? The geriatric vampire was doing it with an 18-year-old, and we were all fine and dandy. Our parents were taking us to the movies to watch this stuff. They bought us the books. Like, let's all take that into account as well. Now is not the time to pull out the age gaps are wrong when the entire world was obsessed over one. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna be honest, I did not enjoy Twilight. Now with a fully developed frontal lobe, that wasn't romantic, that was grandpa vibes. That vampire had been on Earth for so long, he should have been acting like a grandpa, telling you war stories and going to bed at 8 p.m. with a cup of tea. He's lived his life, you know? But no, hanging out with high schoolers. What the heck was happening? How was he even attracted to a child and spent every single day surrounded by minors? And none of us saw an issue with it. I want to call my mom right now and ask her what the heck was happening. I'm starting to understand why 50 Shades of Grey was Twilight fanfiction. It's starting to make sense to me right at this second. It's the fact that the 50 Shades of Grey actually seems more appropriate to me right now. Less problematic. That's weird, man. Yeah, if you want a really good age gap romance, where the dynamics are dubious, but the characters actually make sense and it's written very, very well, Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas would always be my recommendation. It is 18 plus though, it is spicy. Do not go into it if you want something that's closed door, okay? But I found it to be very good and very interesting. And yes, it still includes problematic dynamics, but I found it very fun and enjoyable. Because, you know, it's not the gap that's inherently problematic, it's the portrayal. At least that's my thesis. Not every age gap book is abusive and not every critique is wrong, but words matter, nuance matters more. Make sure you follow this, subscribe. I don't know if you can subscribe to a podcast. And if you want a full list of age gap romances that actually nail this trope, I can share it with you on the Substack chat. I'll leave the link to it in the show notes. Join the chat, message me, and of course, follow me everywhere on @theauthorh. I'll see you next week.